The information provided in this podcast is for general knowledge and informational purposes only. It does not constitute medical advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional for diagnosis and treatment of any medical condition. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Unplugged Healthcast or Dr. Wall.
He is known as the Hormone Whisperer, best-selling author, international speaker, founder of the Wellness Way.
We have to recognize that there is an innate intelligence. Your body knows what it's doing. It's masterful.
Neck pain, backaches, headaches, fatigue, the list goes on, and you're likely on it. Tired of the broken system and big pharma? We offer logical solutions, teach you to think critically, and empower you to reclaim your health. Welcome to the Unplugged Healthcast with Dr. Kevin Wall.
Good morning. Welcome back to the Unplugged Healthcast. I am your host, Dr. Kevin Wall, and I have a story for you today. This story starts a lot of years ago. I'm going to go back to 1981. See, there's a book out there that says everything you need to know in life you learned in kindergarten. And I disagree. I'd like to write a book. It says everything you need to know you learned in high school home ec. See, many of you don't even know what I'm talking about because this day and age, home ec isn't even an option at your high school. But back in my day, it was an option, and it was an option that every football player wanted to be in his high school senior year. And so that is where the story begins, and it goes back to my home ec teacher, Mrs. Mary Cook. Back then, they taught you how to cook, how to clean, how to sew. 32 years of marriage, I've cooked every Thanksgiving meal up to this point. My wife is thankful for Mary Cook. But one day on Mary's agenda, the class schedule, it was chocolate chip cookie day. Who doesn't love a chocolate chip cookie? Well, in the chocolate chip cookie recipe, if you've never baked them, it's a pretty simple recipe. It's about 6 ingredients, maybe 5 different steps. But step 3 was time to put a teaspoon of baking powder in. Well, me and my buddy in small town USA, Center Point, Iowa, town of 1,500, Randy Duro and I, best friends, football players together, we just decided to grab what was convenient, and it looked like baking powder, but it was baking soda. See, these cookies did not look like cookies, they did not smell like cookies, and they definitely did not taste like chocolate chip cookies. And see, this is the story of your hormones. See, in your recipe, you have over 50 different hormones produced by 9 different glands in your body and 5 different organs. See, that's a complicated recipe. And the opportunity to mess that up is unfortunately pretty high these days. Years ago, our ancestors didn't have as many complicated recipes. The amount of steroids and issues and chemicals in our food and our water, antibiotics, medications, toxins, bad food, stress factors, all these things ultimately lead to your hormones being messed up. The end result of your hormones being off are not hot flashes. It's things like endometriosis, polycystic ovary disease. We're talking headaches, migraines, joint pain, indigestion, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. The list is pretty high, and chances are you are on it. When you understand that you got a hormone issue, well, that's the story that we're going to unplug today for you on the Unplugged Healthcast. But I will tell you, I am surely not an expert in hormones or unplugging you myself. So as any smart entrepreneur knows, I surround myself and I have invited and had access to bring a phenomenal guest on to help us understand how to unplug you from this bad recipe. He is known as the Hormone Whisperer. He is a best-selling author. He is an international speaker. He is the founder of the Wellness Way, over 80 clinics nationwide. Would you welcome, and can I introduce to you Dr. Patrick Flynn? Doc, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here today.
Well, gosh, I got a couple simple questions for you, if that's all right. I think you grew up in Crevitz, Wisconsin. Is that true?
That is true. It's just a nice small town of 900 people. Actually, I grew up west of there, so we grew up on a lot of acreage and things like that. So I'm just a country boy at heart.
Yeah, me as well. I grew up on a farm in Center Point, Iowa, right around Cedar Rapids, and what a great way to grow up, right? Things were simple, ate out of the garden, and life was a little less complicated. Well, I'm curious if you had home ec.
We did. Actually, when you were saying that, it just made me smile, and I remember baking the cake and everything. It was, and sewing and everything. But that was a standard part of high school.
Yeah, it really should come back, shouldn't it?
Yes, it should.
Does it exist? I don't have high school kids anymore. My kids were homeschooled, but does it exist out in public? Do you know?
I don't think so. Not with all the modern classes and technology that they have today. I think they got rid of it years ago.
All right. Well, moving past small town USA, one of my favorite statements I say often is the level of your confront in life will determine the level of your success. And I don't mean that by getting in people's grills and telling everybody what you think of them and just, telling everybody what to do. That's not it. In fact, I started with a disagreement where I don't believe the book had everything in it, but you wrote a book called I Disagree. This is out there. If you haven't read it, listeners, you need to go get it. You want to take a moment, Doc, and tell us a little bit about that book and maybe what led you down that road to write something.
Yeah, and I think your quote is absolutely beautiful. I hope people take that quote to heart because it's actually pretty genius. Because I was confronted with a situation that I wish I never had to be confronted with. And the fact is, it made me to look at things even more differently than I was before. And that led to how I was looking at things as far as hormones. And I looked at the way the world was looking. I looked at the current healthcare system, still looks at it today. And I just said, I disagree. I just disagree. I remember sitting in college when our professors would make certain statements, and I'm even talking undergraduate, postgraduate, chiropractic school, everything, and they'd make a statement, and I just raise my hand and say, I disagree. And people think that's kind of confrontational, but it's like, no, can I see it from a different viewpoint? And then what happened is this. So then the book came out, became an international bestseller, and then I realized that the perspective that we have, it's very, foundationally very strong. And so then I added more to the book and actually became a fully different book. But my title was, I Still Disagree. And that one became an international bestseller in a week. And so it was kind of cool. It's just from a situation where just because a lot of people say something doesn't make it true. And it just takes a strong individual from a different perspective saying, I disagree, confront those situations. Because if you don't, there might be people that are suffering and continue to suffer because they're made to believe that you can't see it from a different perspective.
Yeah, we say often that it's just because one doctor doesn't work doesn't mean that another doctor could possibly help you. And the beginning to the answer to most people's health problem is a question, is something like that, is looking past maybe the diagnosis, the prognosis, the death sentence that often people are given, correct?
I would agree with you 100%.
All right. Well, before we maybe get into hormones, I'd like to just take a moment and get a little bit of extra wisdom out of you that maybe other people don't often get, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
We say often, or I say often at least, that we are the sum accumulation of the decisions we have made up to this point in our life. That's a good thing and a bad thing, that if you don't like where you're at, you can make better decisions and move forward. But you have obviously, got to a point of high influence. I mean, you're a pretty successful guy. I think that's from everybody's standards. But what was maybe the one decision that you made that you recall that vaulted you in this direction?
Actually willing to stand on what I knew was right, regardless that the vast majority of people said it wasn't. That was probably the greatest decision because I looked at the sick and suffering and said, no, I disagree with you. And I'll stand and take all the arrows and take all the name calling and the kicked off every media and all the things like that. I'm like, no, if someone just has to stand up for what you know is right. And then I tell people, if I was wrong, I wouldn't be getting the clinical results that we still get today.
All right. Well, you're in a position, and I speak and talk about leadership. It's one of my favorite topics. What's the number one leadership quality or skill that you have that really kind of puts you in this position where people follow, people want to listen, people want to, allow you to lead?
Well, I think I have a theory. I say you can never go wrong investing in other people. Okay, and you could relate that to personal growth or even business. Not all investments turn out. You're saying, so what happens is, but you can never go wrong trying to, invest in people in their understanding, their knowledge, caring about them financially. You have three important things to give people: your time, energy, and money. And so therefore, even as a doc, I'm going to give them my time to give them great information, invest in them, because it can change your life. Now what they do with it is not up to me, it's up to them. But I just believe you can never go wrong when you invest in other people. And so I look at what I did clinically and what I do business-wise. I'm constantly investing into people of all ages, of male, female, young, old, doesn't matter your race, your ethnicity, everything that way. I just have a leadership theory that says you never go wrong investing in other people.
Well, that's awesome, and I appreciate you invested in us today and spending some time with us.
I appreciate it, and I think it's an honor. I think it's an honor that we have a caller or anybody that listens to this. I'm just humbled and honored that just people just like to listen to some of the ideas I have to share.
What's the one thing, if they just shut us off after this conversation, what's the one thing they're going to remember from us, from you, on advice as a doctor to the patients?
That you have more control than you think. It's in your hands. It really is. And therefore, the information we give you, and that's all we're given. We're just sharing some information. What you do with it is up to you, but it can be life-changing just by applying the most simple things. And yes, is it different from male to female? Absolutely. But and here's the even better thing. You don't need a doctor like us to always guide you. That's another misconception. You can take control of your own health and really make a massive difference where you need all doctors less.
Yeah, it's one of our concepts, our core principles. Health is simpler than you think it is. And number two, the healer is actually you, the patient, that you're in charge and you can have control and you can heal yourself, providing you understand the basic principles. So this recipe I talked about, this chocolate chip cookie analogy I threw out there, I hope people understand and see that, because their body is basically one big recipe, but they get it so maybe jacked up, so altered, they can't find their way back. They just start throwing more chocolate chips, more sugar, more medications into the recipe. And next thing you know, they're so far down the road, I think some of them just lose hope. And part of this Unplugged Healthcast is we need to give people hope so they can start asking questions again. How do we get people to back up on these recipes and find solutions again?
I think what separates the chiropractic field from all healthcare, and I talk about this on if I'm speaking at a medical conference or even a naturopathic conference or anything that way, is we have to recognize that there is an innate intelligence. Your body knows what it's doing. It's masterful. For example, there's a cause and effect relationship to everything we do. So if we have an undesired effect, there's some causal factor that's there. And I think we've lost the concept of how amazing the human body, how basic physiology and biochemistry actually works. And for example, if I put a pebble in your shoe and you walk around all day, that simple traumatic aspect is going to change. There's going to be neurological changes. There's going to be biochemical changes. There's going to be GI changes. There's going to be stomach acid changes. There's going to be hormonal changes. And it was just from a little simple pebble in your shoe. And you can walk around and try to change those effects. But you have to look at the things that are really causing your body to try to adapt to what you've been doing to it for so long. And I think that's where we go, listen, and this frustrates a little people when I see this, but let me explain something. When you look at that there's intelligence that actually really governs your body, then you go, man, it doesn't make mistakes. It's just trying to adapt to all the crazy thing you're doing to it every single day.
After an injury, it can feel like life's on hold, but at AFC, we're here to help you get back to what matters. With personalized injury plans and our expert staff, we don't just treat the pain, we guide you back to strength and confidence. Because getting back isn't just about healing, it's about thriving. Call us or visit our website to start your journey today.
And there's a lot of gals, a lot of females that, of course, seem to maybe be affected by these issues. Males kind of check out thinking they're not hormone affected, but let's go to the females to start with. What's the number one pebble that gets in their shoe that sets them off the road that maybe they could go back and remove?
Now, remember, this is probably a thing that probably made me the most popular 25 years ago, because I can always talk about this. Now, remember, I'm going to give you the answer, then we're going to walk backwards a little bit that way and how I kind of came up with it that way. I think mental stress destroys women faster than anything. Faster than anything. I think it destroys their body from a hormonal standpoint, from a fight or flight standpoint. And so it's really funny. So I started to really recognize and obviously the things that affect males is dramatically different. Now, I'm not saying it's the only thing. I'm just saying it's probably the most dominant thing. And with culture changes over the last 25 years, I've seen it become more. And I actually employ more women than I employ men. And I'm trying to say, ladies, listen, don't let the stress get to you because it can have a hormonal effect. Let me give you something that most women have actually experienced. There's times where they have some major stressful event that happens during the month and they may delay or even skip their cycle. It changes the whole pattern of it that way. Because there's a neurological response that can change the endocrine response. Because remember, hormones just by nature, by the term Latin, is just a messenger. So therefore, the messages coming in under high fight or flight or high mental stress. Now, remember, stress is more than just mental. Just I even go back to the pebble in your shoe. That's a physical stress. Being a chiropractor, you can actually have problems to your joints and spine and things like that, and that's a stress. There's toxic stress. And that's one thing why I actually, when I was looking to do what I was going to do, the chiropractic profession meant so much to me and made so much sense to me because I was really studying immunology and nutrition before I went to chiropractic school. And I just loved the premises of our old history of talking about trauma, toxins, and thoughts, which, for example, has been set down in our books well over 100 years ago. And I said, listen, in our modern day, if you look at what's happening, which throws the whole endocrine system off, you're going to find some trauma, toxin, or thought that's contributing to it. And your body's just trying to always adapt to all these things going on and all the messages being, abnormal. And therefore, clinically, I've looked and said, oh my goodness, after running literally hundreds of thousands of labs, I'm like, oh my goodness, that mental stress just changes everything in them dramatically. And if it doesn't get under control, you get adjusted, you could eat right, you could do all the great things, and your body still goes in a very bad direction.
Well, that's definitely more prevalent. I say our ancestors never had to deal with the health problems that we see today because of just maybe that one factor alone. How do people avoid mental stress? I mean, I'm sure people are asking that as they hear that answer.
Everybody's stressors are different, okay? And some things, and this is where sometimes people are very critical, what I have to say, and I'm going to give you some analogies. But if I were just to have a group of women in front of me, which happens all the time I'm speaking, and I'll say, ladies, let me ask you a question. Who stresses out more, men or women? They yell, women. And I say, who causes women the most stress? And they yell, men, okay? And then they pause for a second and go, oh my goodness. You know what I'm saying? Now, once again, I've been married like you have. I've been married for 24 years. I have 4 beautiful daughters, which they told me was never going to happen. But here's the point. And I started to recognize that when you start to get a woman to realize that stress is a major factor, they start analyzing it and they start removing those stressors from their life. You understand? And they go, and they're on, let's say their stressors of food, let's say their stressors, actually specific traumas to their body, like we talk about the pebble in your shoe or a bad spine or things like this. Or even, no joke, a bad friendship, a bad relationship. Because once they recognize that they start to feel the endocrine response that happens, let's say they get around their spouse, get around a girlfriend, get around their job, eat something bad, and they can even sense the changes. They're basically going, oh my goodness, now I recognize these things, and women are very intelligent to recognize them. The tough part is sometimes they have a hard time dealing with it because they have to make some big choices.
That really comes down to it because we surround ourselves with friends that we probably shouldn't, and we keep people around their life that probably really just making it toxic. We hear the drama stories and all that things. And then if we do get in a mental health crisis or a relationship issue, we just never get help, right? We just stick it out, assume it's going to get better like people do with their health problems. And the one thing we know in life, as you get older, health problems get worse. What if we jump to men, because men just think hormones aren't really something they deal with. You and I both know. In fact, we see it all the time, the epidemic of everyone's getting testosterone shots. You know, the gyms are full of guys just big and strong. And I'm just wondering, are we making this better or are we making this worse with some of those things?
Well, we have to look at just, once again, the basic physiology and biochemistry behind testosterone production. As long as there's no major neurological problem or testicular problem, males can make a significant amount of hormone upon demand. And so therefore, when we say, Doc, I have low testosterone and I don't have a brain tumor, a pituitary problem, or I've never had trauma to my testicles, everything seems to be working right, you're right. And see, that's where the mistake comes in. Because just like you're going to find out with female hormones, but with male hormones, people do not realize this. If you look like a hormone, I want you to imagine like going from A to D. From go to A to D, you have to go from A to B, B to C, C to D. Now what happens is this. To produce testosterone, let's say you go from A to C. So it starts out with pituitary hormone, there's some stimulation, there's conversion, all of a sudden, next thing you know, you go to B and then it goes to C, and there's your testosterone. You can pull your blood work, you go for your free total, and mine's at 851, and I'm 50 years old. And all of a sudden they're like, but then what happens is, a 28-year-old goes, I'm at 400, I'm at 250. How is that possible? You're 50 and I'm in my 20s. Well, they don't have any neurological or even some testicular damage. But this is the biggest thing. I told you, testosterone was that C. It can convert to D. So therefore, guess what happens? What is that conversion? It's called aromatase. And they're converting their testosterone into the estrogens. And that's why you see some major negative effect. Now, what's the number one thing that does that? It's actually adipose tissue. So with the metabolic syndrome and all the major obesity epidemics that we have here in both males and females, they're aromatasing their testosterone into estrogens. And it's why 1 out of every 100 breast cancer diagnoses now comes from men, which they know that the estrogens that get abnormally elevated, both men and women, can change breast in either person. Remember, the hormones will react because it's a messenger. And so therefore, when I first look at men, if I see any kind of obesity, I just picture their testosterone not maximizing the level it can be. And now we're seeing it, people saying, testosterone's at all-time low. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But here's what happens. Yes, and I watch guys go, hey, I started exercising and nothing changed. Yeah, but you still have adipose tissue. You're still converting that stuff into it. And then you measure the estrogens and they're off the chart. And they're wondering why they're having gynecomastia and even different emotional and physical attributes that are not them as a male. And so it's really frustrating watching that happen. And so I look at a guy and say, listen, Doc, I want to get my testosterone levels up. Okay, are you willing to put in the work? It's not just take some supplement. I get very frustrated. All you have to do is watch a sporting event, which I don't watch. All you have to do is watch a sporting event and you see these supplementation. And I get very frustrated because I'm like going, give that to a 300-pound man. You can give him all the supplementation you want. It isn't going to increase your testosterone. And if you get a little free change and feel a little bit better, it's not long-standing because you're just trying to manipulate your hormones, which is something natural.
So getting the adipose off, so exercise, weight loss, all those things are relevant. But just going and getting those prescriptions for testosterone, which is going on all over the place. We're just deciding that we're going to alter the recipe to somehow make the cookie sweeter. But at the end of the day, we're going to end up with a mess.
I said this many times, and this is what scares me. I'm just going to give you the clinical side effects, okay? I'm very scared about the fact that when people are taking TRT, that there's going to be enlargement of the heart. And all of a sudden they have a major, ischemic issue and atrial, natrium enlargement, and then they don't realize and they get a clot. And it's like, remember, that's not supposed to happen that way, you understand? And it's really scary that we're gonna watch all these people actually have some major cardiovascular issues from taking it. And yes, they may have synthetically pushed their body to, people say, but Doc, it's more of a bioidentical. Remember, if your levels are jacked up and you're not supposed to have those levels because your body physiologically is not supposed to demand at that level, there is cardiomegaly and all the things that do happen. And so I'm very worried about the future of the guys that consistently take this because there's going to be some cardiovascular issues probably the most. I mean, people are like, wow, my testicles, I don't really care about shrinkage and things like that. And I've heard guys say that. I've said, guys, I'm okay if that's not your biggest concern. I'm more concerned about your heart issues.
Well, that's great advice, and we got to really wake this team up or this situation, because it's, in my opinion, we're just chasing the wrong rabbits down the wrong holes all day long, and we're wondering why the heck we're in the dark. All right, well, we're gonna take a quick break here and get a call or on the phone here, and she's got a question, I know, and by the way, if you want to be a call in on the show, if you'd like to get some information and ask questions to people like Dr. Flynn or people I get on the show, they can go to drkevinwall.com and they can ask me questions there. And Dr. Flynn, if they want to find you online, how do they find you if they want to ask you questions? Is there a website somewhere to go to?
Well, you can always go to thewellnessway.com, just the name of our clinics that way, or you can just jump on my Instagram. As long as I'm on social media, they kick me off all the time. I just got kicked off TikTok again. So it seems like Instagram has been a little bit better to me recently and stuff, and I have a pretty large page there. Or just thewellnessway.com, and you can send a question that way too.
All right, well, we'll be right back with our caller.
Pain holding you back? AFC Physical Medicine and Chiropractic Centers of Phoenix have real solutions to get your life back. With 9 valley-wide locations, we offer integrated care including chiropractic, medical, and nutritional support. Our approach goes beyond prescriptions, combining therapies to help you thrive. Don't let pain define your story. Take the first step towards living life to its fullest. Call us now at 480-210-6103 or visit afcchiropractic.com to schedule your appointment.
All right, welcome back to the Unplugged Healthcast. Dr. Kevin Wall here, and we have with us Dr. Patrick Flynn from the Wellness Way, clinics all over the United States, international speaker and best-selling author of I Disagree. And I think what was the second book you wrote?
I Still Disagree.
All right. Well, Renee, if you're there, I know you have a question, and it's not going to be for me. I'm not your hormone expert, but we have one on the line here. What's your question, if you will?
Well, I'm 59 years old, but I started having menopause around 51, and vertigo kicked in really big right after that. And I went all around and got all these tests and did the Epley maneuver, and nothing worked. But I found out that through chiropractic and bioidentical hormone replacement, it seemed to stabilize the problem. But through all of that, I also found out that I'm gluten intolerant. So my question is my gluten intolerance causing sporadic vertigo to come back? And do I have to stay on testosterone forever?
Well, let's look at some of the major contributing factors of vertigo. There is no doubt there can be an inner ear problem. There could be crystallization, but that could have been from an infection and stuff. And a lot of times they can get checked out from a good ENT, and they can look in there and stuff like that. And like she said, but she noticed it happened during the menopausal years, okay? Now remember, another contributing factor to vertigo, which is going to connect directly to her gluten intolerance and also her menopausal stage of life, is the fact that adrenal insufficiency, okay? Because adrenal insufficiency is going to lead to actually vertigo. Now, why is that important? Because if you look at during cyclic years, you actually have the pituitary actually stimulating the ovaries and the follicle to grow in significant amount of hormones, and that represents a good 60-70% of your hormone production, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little less. I see different statistics. There's a 20 to 30% production of your anabolic hormones from your adrenals, and then you get some adipose conversion, and you get about 10% of that from your adipose tissue, okay? Now, when you move into the menopausal years, it's highly and mostly dependent on your adrenals. So now you're moving into to menopause, where you need a significant amount of adrenal production for your androgens, and it cannot do that. So therefore, you become hormonally deficient during your menopausal years, which now leads to even more adrenal insufficiency, which now contributes to your vertigo even greater. And that's why when you took bioidentical hormones to replace it, you're like, oh my goodness, now my adrenals actually could play a little bit of catch up, and it replaced some of those hormones that were produced by there, and then you saw some benefit. Now, let's go back to this. Adrenals respond to stressors. Can gluten intolerance, where there's an inflammatory response every time you eat gluten, can that put a demand on your adrenals to respond and counteract with hormones to try to help you adapt? Absolutely. Keep on doing that. No different than a muscle, it fatigues out. That's why you start to get low cortisol, low testosterone, low DHEA. because all of the stressors, so that gluten intolerance, mental stress, subluxations, traumatic things happen to her body, can all lead to an adrenal insufficiency. And now when you transition from cyclic in the menopausal years, you are so dependent on those androgens being produced by your adrenals, and it can't keep up. You just don't have enough fuel in the tank. And therefore, there's a major big contributing factor of why you actually have vertigo. And then you try to replace it. Now watch this. If you try to get off your bioidenticals without sufficiency restoring your adrenals, that vertigo is going to come back with a vengeance.
If there's an answer on this, how does she get her adrenals back to sufficiency? I put people on adrenal supplements. Adrenal exhaustion is a massive problem today. Most medical doctors and medical tests and blood tests don't test adrenals until they're ultimately gone or done. You need to catch it before it gets that far. But how do you bring it back? What would we tell this gal? And can she get off of testosterone? I guess unless she has to get her adrenals back, it sounds like.
Well, and you see, I set everybody up because I set you up to even get those questions. See, because here's what happens. And this is where everything stems from. You know, when I realized that there were so many of these issues going out there, they'd say, okay, well, what's going on with my adrenals? We don't know. We don't guess. We test. So let's get some labs done. And then when you start looking at all of the hormones needed to be measured, this was the big thing I did not realize until I was first in practice when I met my wife that was diagnosed with endometriosis. And by nature, there has some hormonal components, and it can be very estrogen dominant that way. So when I asked her doctors to give me her labs, what they did in this, and this is the big thing, and this is going to apply to this woman that asked the question, Renee. Thank you so much for that beautiful question. Sad that you were suffering for all those years, because if we would have got some labs done to you during your cyclic years, you're going to notice there's probably some issues back then where you're starting to go low on hormone and sometimes even high. But I asked my wife's doctor, I said, hey, listen, can I have her labs? And I requested labs, and what they did is this. They measured one of her primary estrogens. Now, what do I mean? Let's step back for a second. If I were to ask you, Doc, what's the major hormone that makes us men? We all know this. It's testosterone. Okay, measure it in the blood, pretty simple, get free and total, fantastic, okay? And then if I were to ask Renee, hey Renee, what's that major hormone that makes you who you are? They're gonna say, Doc, it's estrogen. And I'm gonna say, well, that's not true because estrogen is not a hormone. And people are like, wait, what? I'm like, estrogen is not a hormone. Please do me a favor, go to any lab and look for the term estrogen on the lab. You cannot. Estrogen is a term that represents many hormones. And that right there just surprised women. I'm like, so therefore, in a cyclic realm, most of the time they'll measure estradiol. If you're menopausal, they'll measure estrone because those are some of the big contributing factors. But even there's estriol, which is actually, and they call those the primary. But even then, I believe that's incomplete because you have actually other estrogens. Now, they're hydroxylated metabolites. They're conjugate metabolites. And so therefore, there's other forms of estrogens that have a significant effect on all the sex characteristics, all the mental and physical stability to a woman. Why? And I really recognized this 25 years ago, that their testing for hormones is dramatically incomplete. So I called one of the largest labs in the world and said, can we measure them? And I kid you not, Doc, this is where I said, I disagree. They said, yes, you can, but insurance doesn't pay for them. I'm like, but I disagree. I have a suffering, sick woman that I want to marry that has endometriosis and ulcerative colitis and cystic acne and cluster headaches that says it's infertile. And how can I make a judgment on her estrogens when you measure one of them? It just made no clinical sense to me. So I said, all right, I'm going to start running labs. So this young lady, so Renee. So therefore, what happened is this. And this is where I think the natural world makes a big mistake. Yes, guess what happens? Can we generalize that ashwagandha probably could have helped this woman years ago and even right now? Sure. But when do you start and when do you stop? When do you take it in the morning? Do you take it in the afternoon? Maybe they need licorice. Maybe they need other things. And so just by throwing supplements because they have less consequences than medications, to me, doesn't give the scientific validation or even the credibility. And I just said, listen, I'm not going to give somebody something unless I have some really detailed labs. And then I realized the only way that you can really measure a woman's hormones is by doing blood and urine together. Blood and urine together. And so therefore, women said, I had my hormones tested. I said, well, let me see your blood and your urine work. And they're like, what? I don't know what you mean. Well, then you're making judgments on yourself with incomplete labs. It's just that simple.
People think they have health insurance, and I've been saying for years, and you know this is not true. They have disease insurance at best. And that means is when you've got to the state of cancer and fractures and tumors and massive injuries, we're thankful for what I call the firemen of health that they're going to put you out. But at the end of the day, when you want to get healthy, when you want to live a vibrant, vital life, it unfortunately takes you out of the allopathic paradigm and the insurance reimbursement paradigm. And you got to just consider, do you want to be healthy or wealthy? If you decide to be healthy today, you probably will be both later. But if you decide to be wealthy today, you're probably going to be unhealthy later. Do you think that's true, Doc?
Well, let's just look at stats, because everybody wants to always, not us, but people want to argue emotionally. And so I just look at the amount of bankruptcies, loss of legacy and passed down wealth. Do you understand there's a lot of people's assets that are confiscated by the medical field because when they die, they're so broke, not because they didn't even build wealth. It's just that there's a significant amount of things turned over to the medical field to recoup their costs. And I don't blame them for doing it. But the idea is like people can save up their whole life and leave a nice nest egg for their kids. And most of it, and don't quote me exactly, but I think the last time I read it, I think over 50% have problems handing wealth down because they actually have to pass on to pay for their bills for medical. And if you look at 2024, $4.3 trillion was spent that year on healthcare in the United States, not worldwide, in the United States. Well, where's that coming from? You know, there's coming from massive illness, and I understand. I have no problem with people having to spend money on healthcare, but that's the thing. And we talked about at the beginning. There's specific things you can do that are very cost effective, that you don't need a lot of money to do to maintain and take control. But just when people end up in a very bad state, they've been through everything. They've been through so many problems. Then they come to me and said, "I got to run these tests. That's going to be $700-800, and I'm sorry to say, insurance isn't going to pay for it." But the wealth of information they get and the clinical outcomes they get are just dramatic. But I feel sorry for them because, once again, that's what I said. That's why I had to say I disagree with the current healthcare system. I'm not saying it doesn't have benefits. I'm just saying, for example, if you think that's the only way to look at things, and I want to correct something. I don't, and I would never call myself this, and I don't think anybody should ever call me this because you'll never see this thing. When people say experts or all things like this, I'm not an expert. What I mean with this, just because I've had clinical success in certain area of field and I focus on it, and remember, because and you think of it this way, the way that we even look at the human body, there can't be an expert, because I've defined what an expert is. An expert is a person that knows more and more about less and less. For example, if you want to be a cardiovascular expert, you can even study the heart and say an aspirin a day is good for it, which is kind of true. But an aspirin a day for the brain is not good. So I'm not gonna hone down into one system to actually try to say that this is what I'm going to focus on, because here's what happens. That woman had a GI problem, a food problem that led to hormone problems. Someone could have mental stress. Someone could have physical trauma. So that's why I love about the chiropractic profession. We're meant to, and I even hate the term, we're meant to look at it more holistically, that we have to investigate the multiple factors, because there's never just one, that is a contributing stressor that can throw these things off. But even when it's thrown off, let's get the proper labs of actually just measuring physiology, not pathology. I understand that when you're looking at disease states, end states, they want a diagnosis and things this. I don't even care about a diagnosis. I'm actually going to run some labs to see where you're physiologically at.
Yeah. Yeah, we're way too focused on getting a label that we wear the rest of our life and we die with, versus finding out the functional problem where it starts, get to the root of it, start and turn it back on. So, well, we could talk for hours, and I appreciate your time. I'm not going to take more of it at the moment. If we were going to give some hope as we finish the show to all these people in chronic illness of endometriosis, polycystic, what would be maybe the one bit of hope you would give them? I have a thought I'll finish with, but I'm going to give you first right of refusal. What's the one thought that these guys can walk away with going, man, I actually have hope for my health in the future.
Well, just like causal factors, that's why I even hate when Natural World says, I'm going after the cause. There's no such thing as a cause. There's multiple factors, and it's in your control. The vast majority, and even research will show you, 95% of all chronic conditions are actually lifestyle related. Now, here's what happens. Number one, get some labs done. Number two, sleep, eat more protein, and cut back on your sugar. If everybody just did that alone, guess what happens? They're going to have some positive benefits to their GI, to their hormones, to every area of your life, every condition, because metabolic syndrome contributes worse to every other condition there is. So sleep is so important. It can change your hormones overnight. Keep the stress down. Make sure that you're getting a significant amount of proteins. And number two, I see this just because of the obesity epidemic and how even aromatase your testosterone reduce your sugar intake. Carbs are good, but people are eating way too many high glycemic carbs that can lead to some endocrine changes that I'm concerned about. But that's in your control. It costs you nothing. It's in your control.
Well, I'm not even going to follow that up, Doc. You wrapped it up really well. I hope people got value out of that. I got to tell you that if you knew what we knew, you would do what we do. And that's not an ego statement. That's just basic. Like, we're not some rocket science Einsteins. We just went to the same school, which is pretty cool. We learned the same things, and we're just applying them and helping you understand so you can apply them to your life. Health is simpler than you think it is. There's hope for your health. You just need to take action and don't rely on your insurance to get you healthy. It's your responsibility. It's within your grasp, as Dr. Flynn has so eloquently described. Doc, thanks so much again for your time. If I could promote you a little bit more with the wellness way, there's clinics all throughout the United States. If they want to find a doctor that does your system, they can do that, right? If probably in their area, there's probably somebody.
Yep, but what I'd rather have people focus on is if you go to the Wellness Way website, there's just so much free information. It's just, you can learn about this because like you said, if you knew what we knew, you'd do what we do. So I'd rather have a person start to just understand some good information, free information, and take massive control, because then if you need to tweak or rebuild a little bit that way, guess what happens? It's much more cost effective, it's much better, and we try to always give so much free information because I believe that so many people need help out there.
All right, guys. Well, here we are. We're finishing up the Unplugged Healthcast for today on hormones. If you would do me a favor, follow our show, share it with somebody so we can get the message out. We're just here trying to change the world, just one podcast at a time. So we'll see you again on the Unplugged Healthcast. This is Dr. Wall and
Dr. Patrick Flynn, thank you so much. I appreciate all you.
Be healthy, be blessed. We'll see you soon.